I need to have security champions within different departments, different teams who are really passionate and interested about security, because only if you're really passionate, interested, you maybe go the extra mile to secure the systems, to maybe also help others to identify certain things or give them a little nudge if everything shifts nowadays, I believe, to the browser. There's just almost all of the application you do, especially if you use a computer, everything from your banking to your cybersecurity solutions, just on the browser. I think the most, maybe 80-90% of the organizations I worked in, it's all browser driven. If you can prove that you can do what you claim to be able to do, yeah, why not? There's definitely a path for you to still become super successful, to succeed, to get everything you really want. We inspired. We work with great talents who I experience and are just very good in what they do. And if they have a CISSP or not, I don't think it matters.
Hi, Tobias. Welcome to our Be Fearless podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I mean, it's amazing, talking today and maybe sharing like some cybersecurity insights.
Yeah, you've been in a cybersecurity place for quite some time. You know, you lived and worked in so many places. You worked and lived in Germany, UK, Korea, Taiwan, New York, Singapore. I can continue the list over and over. And I'm just really curious, how did this journey start and how you went from one place to another?
I don't know where to start, but I'm born in Germany. I was always exposed to electronics, to computers. The house I grew up with my parents, basically had everything in terms of like computer parts, computers, network gear, and fundamental electronic components. And my dad built a lot of stuff himself. And of course, then I was directly exposed to it. I think this is like maybe one of the key aspects how my journey started. For myself, I always wanted to live abroad. I always wanted to work on tech, on computers, on electronics. And I was thinking the only way to do this, I need to study. I need to go to university. And finally I went to university at some point and I studied electronic engineering with all parts of like information technology, computer science, cybersecurity. And this is also why my journey went through so many countries, because I studied in the UK, in Korea. I did research in Taiwan. I did like a small sort of like cultural exchange in Indonesia. And I worked in New York City for some time, and now I'm here working and living in Singapore.
Yeah, sounds like you got exposure to so many different cultures and industries. How would you say is the working culture different? I don't know, New York versus Singapore versus Taiwan, you know, so many exposures.
Very similar, but also very different. It really depends on who you meet, what company you work for. My experiences, for example, the same company can be so different if you sit on one side of the office with one manager, or if you sit on the other side of the office with another manager almost at the same period of time. I actually had that experience. So even you're the same time, same place, same organization, things can be so different. And I think also this in terms of people. Of course, there's a lot of stereotypes and some of them are true. Maybe how working culture is maybe here in Singapore, how working culture is maybe somewhere else. But overall, in the end, a lot of things are very, very similar.
And you work in so many different organizations and multinational companies to startups. How did this whole switch happen? And was it intentional? Was it by accident? How did you go about it?
I think initially it was intentional, especially working in a big corporation, growing up in Germany. I think a lot of people have the mindset working for a big corporation. So I work for Siemens. Siemens is like one of the big player, like an amazing company. It was sort of like a small goal to work for them. And I believe starting your career in a very big corporation can help you with many things, because you get a lot of structure, you get a lot of like thinking how a bigger organization work. And then once you move to a smaller organization, you can adapt that. You can like, hey, we're like super early. We're like only a few people. But in general, this is my experience, how a company should be maybe run in general. Of course, running a startup is so different than running like a 100,000 or 400,000 people company. But at least the fundamentals are very similar. But also moving to a startup was very intentionally. I worked for Siemens for many years, and at some point, being still fairly young, I was like, I wanted to go out, I wanted to see, I want to take some risk. I want to join startups, which may be very in the early stage, not very secure, but it's a total different learning curve. And this is why at some point I jumped out of Siemens and jumped through some startups.
How did you stumble upon Aspire?
So actually they found me. I think LinkedIn is the best tool nowadays for connecting with people, for finding new opportunities, and for opportunities to find you.
LinkedIn connected us.
Exactly. So I think nowadays it's like one of the prime locations.
So when you started working at Aspire, did you feel like you brought this structure into a company, from cyber perspective?
Partly yes, for sure. But you highly need to adapt it, because if you're very early stage, you don't have the resources. You also don't have the time and energy to focus on building everything very, very structured. Having enough people in place to do everything. So you need to take pieces out of it, adapt it in a way that you can use it with your current manpower, with your budget. Also, the balance in a startup is totally different from between fast growth and being stable. As we all know, startups, they need to grow, they need to make money, they need to establish themselves. So the balance is more on like, hey, let's maybe take a little bit higher risk on maybe the cyber side, on the compliance side, but we're growing very fast. And then later on, we focus on it.
What are some key learnings that you got once you joined the startup world? It's a totally new space. What are, would you say, like 3 lessons that you took out this whole experience?
I believe a lot of the stereotypes are true about startups.
Okay.
They're risky. They can fail. I was also in a startup which at some point ran out of money. They're very hectic, chaotic. Everyone wears several hats. Also, at the moment, I wear several hats. I'm involved in just too many topics. Usually my schedule is, or like my meetings are 15 to 30 minutes. And every 15 to 30 minutes, new topics, changing of maybe perspective, different stakeholders, sometimes even working with different countries. So this is very different in a startup. You just have so much exposure to so many things, and you need to adapt. You need to grow also way faster than in a big organization, because as the company grows, you need to grow. If not, it's you're just too slow to understand and really drive.
So you said you have like 15, 30 minutes meetings. How does your day typically look like? Like you wake up, I don't know, are you 5 a.m. person or?
I tried it at some point. To really get up in the morning, especially in Singapore. It's just too hard to exercise. Maybe after 9. So I usually tried to go for a run before sunrise. I did it for a long, long time. But at the moment, at least, I have my normal, maybe 7 a.m., waking up, doing maybe some things at home, going to the office, and then anything you can imagine comes from a lot of communication, so many different channels, from Slack, WhatsApp, emails, in-person communication, of course, calls, video calls on the phone, via Google Meets, documentation work. supporting the business, what they currently want to do in terms of expansion, licensing, working with third parties for maybe new tools we want to explore. So we do POCs all the time.
Yeah.
Working on new contracts, renewals of tools or partnerships we are using, especially on the IT and cyber side. Working with the team, my own team, with other teams, making sure they're happy, making sure they have the resources they need.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of cybersecurity stuff as well.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of infrastructure monitoring in place, which gives us insights on what is happening on our infrastructure, on our external facing infrastructure in particular. Sometimes maybe some small incident response, of course, if there's like something, some alert, you need to look what actually happened. You need to do potentially some forensic to see, okay, what are next steps? Are we compromised? Are we infected? Also a lot of really hardcore engineering. So we constantly build new capabilities in terms of preventive controls, detective controls, constantly reducing complexity, costs, and in general, just trying to do way more with less resources.
I really don't know how do you squeeze all of it in one day.
I mean,
so many things going on.
I mean, not everything can be packed in one day, but it's definitely all of the items it's always like a little piece.
Yeah.
But of course, you don't do everything just yourself.
Yeah.
You always have a team. You work in a company. You work with a lot of people. So everyone is there, is hands-on, supporting, and you cannot do it yourself.
Great culture is everything when it comes to a company.
Definitely.
And I imagine that financial industry is so different from when you used to work at Siemens. What would you say were some of your key learnings when it came to financial industry in cybersecurity space?
Super obvious thing is you deal with money, right? Nobody wants to lose money. Nobody wants to lose their personal money. And of course, if you operate a financial company, financial institution, you don't want to lose other people's money. Yeah. So there's, of course, one key aspect that you really make sure that you have everything in place, that this is not happening, and always something happens, right? Like always things can go wrong. You need to have things in place that if something goes wrong, that you can recover from it without impact. I think it's also a big mindset in the cybersecurity space, not only on the financial side, also just on a pure infrastructure cybersecurity side. It's also always need to be ready that something can happen and you need to be able to recover as quick as possible and ideally without impact. Other items is you deal with a lot of data, you deal with a lot of PII, customer data, KYB data. So you need to make sure that you have everything in place to protect it, just from a cybersecurity perspective, but also from a compliance and regulatory perspective, that all of the things are in place, that you protected how your regulator's telling you to do. And usually on the top of this, you need to secure it even better to actually make sure that with like all of the threats which coming up all the time, that you're actually able to secure your data and not lose it.
Do you have some of the stories where you thought, okay, this is just in time, we came in time, we solved this problem and were able to resolve like certain issue?
I think when you see some alerts on a user endpoint, where there is potentially malware infection, you don't really know what is happening on that machine. It's potentially even a privileged user or a C-level with a lot of like access to data. There are potentially situations where you're potentially not 100% sure what happened. And before something goes wrong, you need to act super fast to make sure there's maybe an infection. Let's, like cut out that access, that machine from everything else. And make sure there's nothing happening because that user has so privileged access to everything.
Of course. And especially right now, so many attackers are trying to target C-level executives, because they're the ones that hold very sensitive information, right?
True.
What are some of these attacks that, as a head of security at Aspire, that you think of? Okay, those are the three things that every financial institution should be kind of afraid of, but at the same time prepared for?
If we think about the top three, I believe things like initial access. You don't want that anyone gets even an initial access into your systems, into your data. So this is really one thing you need to have preventive and detective controls in place to ensure it's not happening in the first place. And if it happens, you need to detect it, and ideally super fast, and recovering from it super fast. If you maybe think more about maybe C-level and the example we talked before about, where there was maybe a compromise, maybe with malware, you need to have then, again, detective and preventive controls in place that nothing gets executed. So let's say there is a malware on the machine. Okay, that's already something executed, right? But maybe after that, you don't want that there's anything else happening. And then, of course, usually the last step is exfiltration, which is also from a financial institution and from a company holding a lot of data. Very important that this is never happening. That you have everything in place to prevent this. And if there's an attempt, that you have detective controls to detect that, and immediately, if your active automation controls are not working, that you directly jump on it 24/7 and remove it.
They say cybersecurity professionals don't sleep, 24/7.
I try to sleep. Again, this is where you need to have a team in place. You cannot do it yourself. You need to have ideally several shifts, 24/7 SOC, right? Ideally in-house, who can really then act on your infrastructure, who has the skills, the privileges to act on these things. Of course, you never know when something happens. Can be, I don't know, Saturday night, 4 a.m. And you get the call, you have to jump on it.
Great weekend.
Great weekend, yeah.
Which cyber threats you see today are becoming more and more popular, and you see attackers use as the way to target enterprise users?
So what I see definitely a lot, I'm not sure if it's based on data, maybe the most, but what is very obvious is all of these scams via WhatsApp, where somebody calls you on a video call, pretends to be a police officer, asks for a lot of your information, and then, of course, wants to get money from you somehow via maybe your credit card information, maybe wiring money by making all sorts of claims. This is definitely what I see the last few years happening more and more, and it seems a lot of people are falling for it. But maybe more from a sort of company perspective, what I also see a lot is just social media engineering, focusing on user, which have privileged access on C-levels, maybe even people in your financial department who then can wire money. And they're usually targeted on all sorts of channels, on their personal email, on their WhatsApp, on their phone. And with all of the new tools we're having, which can do deep fakes on audio and video, these things become harder and harder to really detect. Attackers
are really using this omni-channel strategy, try to target different platforms. And, we spoke about LinkedIn is such an amazing platform to connect people, but it's also right now highly used by attackers. And one of the cases we saw, someone is reaching out saying, hey, I'd like to be your customer, sends a certain file or a certain link. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts when it comes to encrypted nature of these platforms, right? Existing solutions are really struggling when it comes to encryption. It's typically only the end users that see this information. And security solutions are struggling. What are your thoughts on this?
You mean, for example, WhatsApp doing end-to-end encryption?
Exactly.
The question is, it is maybe end-to-end encrypted, but in terms of privacy, is there no other way that the data goes out? I think from a security perspective, potentially very, very good, right? There's no man in the middle. things which could happen. From a privacy perspective, I guess the question mark is still there. Is your data and your communication actually secure? There are a lot of instances where, or like a lot of reports in the media where somebody potentially used Signal and the communication still got out somehow.
Yeah.
But I think the whole sort of like communication channel, there's a lot of great security solutions, but this is only one aspect of like the whole chain of like product functionalities you need to secure that actually only the person who's intended to read a message is actually only the person who's able to read it. You have also the device on both sides, right? You never really know what the other side does. You may be like super into cybersecurity, you have all the tools, your device is super secure, you don't download any apps you can't verify, everything is hardened, your network. But on the other side, they maybe have a phone which is 5 to 10 years old. It wasn't updated since they bought it. They have a Wi-Fi without a password, and so on. So there's just so many pathways you need to secure to really make end-to-end a secure solution.
Exactly. And with the phone, as you mentioned right now, this popular attack phishing becomes so popular where, you know, there are QR codes while you think you protected the managed device being the laptop. When it comes to phones, it's so much harder to, as you said, connect every device. Someone doesn't like to update phones. I just updated my phone. I had it like for 6 years.
Very good.
Yeah. So it's a lot about these kind of practices. And so what kind of core strategies you employ to foster security first culture at Aspire?
The first thing you really need to have is buy-in from your senior stakeholders. This is usually, I think, what the most people tell you, but it's very difficult to get sometimes. You get it maybe officially, but then really the second step is then leading by examples.
Yeah.
You get the official maybe buy-in from your governance structure within the company, but then you also need that the senior leadership is leading by example. Sometimes very difficult to do, especially if you're very busy, right? And then you shouldn't do certain, like the basic security fundamentals, putting maybe a password on your screen. I think this is usually like what people laugh about, but sometimes happens still, right?
Yeah.
I really believe security needs to be part of everyone in the organization. It's also usually the ideal outcome. In practice, it doesn't work. So what I usually sort of adapt is that I need to have security champions within different departments, different teams who are really passionate and interested about security, because only if you're really passionate, interested, you maybe go the extra mile to secure the systems, to maybe also help others to identify certain things, or give them a little nudge if like they maybe don't follow certain things they should be following.
Yeah.
So I believe these things are maybe the core items to really have security in your organization. And then of course all of these like secure development pipeline, shift left. These things you definitely need to have, because it's also a huge cost impact if you only identify things very later on.
Yeah.
But I would say management buy-in, really doing what you preach.
Yeah.
And having several stakeholders in the organization.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it was similar to us when I just joined SquareX. Everyone had password manager, and I was like, and even folks that are, you know, marketing team, other teams, and they were like, yes, that's the standard practice. So once you have this culture where people like to stay on the top of the things, you know, the cyber threat is right now one of the biggest threats out there, right? So this is really important thing to adopt this kind of culture. So you have like champion in each department that's gonna go like, hey, Tobias told me.
A few, yeah, for sure. I try still to build it out further and further. But over time, if you work for longer in an organization, you definitely find, I would call them like-minded people who are really passionate about security. And sometimes you're quite surprised who really wants to ensure that the organization is secure, that you follow really the basics, which everyone knows you should be doing. You mentioned password managers, MFA, having unique passwords as well. You can use a password manager, but if like all the passwords are the same, it's still not worth much.
Right now, everyone's favorite topic, or right now, least favorite topic is AI. How do you think this area impacts cybersecurity? Are you on the pro side or on the con side?
I believe AI, and especially the last maybe 2 or 3 years with GenAI, it helps so much in terms of productivity. Just maybe taking out the cybersecurity portion for now, a lot of things you do in an organization is document-based. And with all of these like ChatGPTs and other large language model products, you can speed up a lot of the document work you do, from maybe then jumping a little bit into cybersecurity policies, procedures. I guess everyone loves to write them, to update them. So it is a really great tool to at least give you some ideas and brainstorming. This is also how we use a lot of these functionalities very often, using for brainstorming. What can we maybe add? What can we edit? What also everyone loves is doing security questionnaires, analyzing them and filling them. So I believe this is also a really, really great tool. I'm actually really jealous of everyone who was maybe born like the last maybe 10 years or like maybe last 5 years, who has now the capabilities to ask a machine almost any question, gets very good answers, and their learning path is just so accelerated. Think about in the past, you were sitting in university, there's a certain topic you just don't understand. Your friends also don't understand, and your professor doesn't have time all the time to answer your questions. But now you can basically take a picture, say like, hey, solve me this equation.
Explain this to me.
So it's just amazing. And you can adapt this also so much in cybersecurity. What is this vulnerability? How do I fix it? How attacker potentially exploit it? Here's a chunk of data. Search, I don't know, outliers, import information out of this log file, maybe even create me graphs. So there's just so much productivity gains you can get from it. And especially working for a startup where resources, team members are scarce. Having these tools are amazing.
I think attackers also realize how much everyone likes AI. And one of the cases that we see a lot is people downloading free version of ChatGPT, like free version, not actually the actual one. And a lot of people download it as an extension. And then extensions right now have so much power, and it just takes over the whole system. Did you see any of these kind of cases around?
Browser extensions are definitely something very, very interesting. So in the past, we also looked into like similar issues, and we were starting blocking a lot of extensions. What also a lot of people do in the past were VPN extensions. For whatever reason, they maybe need a VPN. And of course, there's a lot of free VPNs. But I guess you can guess what they are doing with your data. And we are starting to block these things, but nowadays we only do whitelisting. So this example I didn't come across because we only whitelist the extensions or the browser extensions we allow. But I can definitely see that.
It is quite a challenge, right? You like to use extensions for, Grammarly, let's say. And then there are those that really help your productivity. Deciding whether to blanket block or blanket whitelist. It's a little bit tricky, and that's why ideally, if there was like a solution that can, be smart enough to know which one is helping you and which one is harming you.
So for example, what I have seen, for example, with Google Chrome, and especially using Google Workspace, I don't want to do an advertisement, but they actually have a very good functionality if you want to allow a new extension is you can see certain key indicators.
Yeah.
Is it a known publisher? Does the extension have any known vulnerabilities? And based on these, if it's super unknown, you definitely can make an informed decision. But I guess in general, what you would also do as a security practitioner, if it's super unknown, you have never heard about it, it also accesses a lot of data which are sensitive. I assume that most of the companies and people working in the security space would say, okay, maybe not. Maybe let's not allow it.
Yeah. Which brings me to the question of what kind of solutions you wish were present in the security space that could help solve some of the cases a lot of financial industry is looking to solve.
I think what I usually look for is like a lightweight solution which doesn't break the bank, especially in the cyber security tooling space. It's very, very hard to find. But again, like just maybe going back to our initial conversation, very often what is important to protect your data, right? So you want to have things in place, especially lightweight DLP solution in place, which detects certain data goes out, goes to a website. It shouldn't go like, for example, Dropbox or your personal Gmail account. These kind of things you want to detect. There are DLP solutions on the market which do these things, but they're very often very heavy, very expensive. You sometimes need like a dedicated team to operate them because they create so many false positives, blocking the business. So there's a huge impact, of course, right? And then security team is not really liked because you block last minute sending of like an important contract to someone because you identified it's restricted or super confidential, and it's just a contract with like a few information on it.
That's when you have like exceptions, you have to have exceptions and raising it. No, it's a very good point. And we saw many threats happening on the browser. What kind of threats would you say are the most prevalent just in that space?
I think, first of all, everything shifts nowadays, I believe, to the browser. There's just almost all of the application you do, especially if you use a computer, everything from your banking to your cybersecurity solutions. It's just on the browser. I think the most, maybe 80-90% of the organizations I worked in, it's all browser driven. And then is, of course, if you go to a lot of websites all day, every day, you maybe don't really identify that this website is not the real one. So stealing of credentials, huge topic. Identifying, really having something in place that this is actually the real website and this is not a website which has almost the exact same URL and looks exactly the same. I think having strong controls in place to identify this is very important. But overall, browser extensions, I believe they also steal a lot of credentials, info stealer malware. And just having really tight and strict controls in place to also manage all your browsers. Sometimes you control maybe one browser in your organization, when users are able to install another browser, which is not controlled. And then it's just same issues, just with a different browser.
Makes sense. And one thing that I wanted to ask is, so, with, as you said, more than 80% of activities right now happening in the browser, originating in the browser, how do you go about solving some of this? Cases when it comes to Aspire, any other company that you worked before, as this is like the doorway for attackers today to target organizations?
So some organizations I worked for and what I have seen is very often you need to have a managed browser. You need to have controls in place to manage the browser in the first place, centrally, to deploy it somehow automatically. So you really know it's like all of the browsers are managed and not only the ones your IT team did during the onboarding, and maybe they missed some onboarding because they were on leave. So you really have the controls in place to do this ideally automatically. I think actually what are the best controls nowadays for browsers is access you can sort of limit based on your device posture. So there are browser extension, Google Chrome is, and Google Workspace, I think, very, very famous for it. They have detection controls in place to see, even on unmanaged devices, if your device has an antivirus, if the firewall is turned on, if you have a screen lock, if your hard disk is encrypted. So all of these are really, really important to have, and then only allow access to your system if all of these things are in place. Especially if you allow BYODs, you need to have at least very limited or like basic security controls in place.
Yeah, no, the BYOD is such a big use case for a lot of organizations, right? And, you know, when there are developers, contractors working, how do you go about securing the environment? Which kind of approach do you take to protect against this kind of vulnerabilities when it comes to BYOD?
So BYODs is, I think, like one of the very risky areas, especially if it's a completely unmanaged BYOD.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have BYODs, you still deploy an MDM on it. So you have at least some control. Completely unmanaged, I think it's super risky. I wouldn't suggest to most of the companies to do that. But there's like a lot of really, really great controls you can have. So for example, smartphone, right? If you want to allow your users to access maybe emails, maybe your calendar, and maybe your communication channel, which is potentially Slack. These things I would argue are you can secure quite well, because you also can encapsulate it that the data only stays on that app. So once the user get offboarded, leaves the company, you can wipe it remotely and it's only contained within that application. So it's not on the device. So from a data perspective, very important. But overall, especially if you have third parties, your employees, and it's BYOD you have maybe limited control over, you really need to make sure that you think through it and only allow access to type of data you want them to have access to. Yeah. So I guess usually if you have a company managed device, trusted employee, you have maybe all of the access to the data you need for your daily work. But if it's maybe your personal device, you only have access to maybe none of the files, but maybe your calendar and maybe your Slack. So you have to separate different accesses based on what type of device, what type of employee, what type of partner it is.
No, it's very important practice, especially, you know, so many devices and accessing so many applications today. It's practically like if you just look at the whole situation as a training, right? And let's say when it comes to certain websites, like taking the same example of LinkedIn, you know, there are so many ways to try to create a fake version of it. And you can't stay vigilant every time, like every website, and especially as a security profession, I just can't imagine how much focus you have to have on each redirect you go, check every URL. And there must be a lot of fatigue when it comes to analyzing all of this data. And but I know you've been saying that a lot of tools been super helpful for you, AI tools, and you also research LLM space in your free time. How do you think? I think last time, which app did we talk about? Notebook LM.
No, Notebook LM.
Yeah.
I mean, when I saw this the first time, I was just like astonished. I mean, we all came across maybe text to speech. We all came across like maybe summaries of ChatGPT or other products. And with Notebook LM, I'm not sure if you tried it till now, but you basically...
I have not. You have to convince me.
You basically just input like a document or a few documents or notes, and then you click generate and you create a podcast like we do right now. And it just sounds really, really great in terms of the communication, in terms of the content. So what I use it sometimes for, if there's like just many documents with each 50 pages, and I just want to get a general glimpse out of it, what is written in there, just put it in, generate, and listen to it during my work. So it's just, again, in terms of productivity, it's an amazing tool.
Do you have any concerns when it comes to DLP of using so many tools?
All of these large language model products, you need to add a lot of information to get data out of it. Especially if you use it in an organization, you need to make sure that you use trusted products, that you understand the privacy of it, that you understand how your employees are using it, and have controls and policies in place that it's used responsibly.
Many organizations right now just block ChatGPT. What are your thoughts on it? Like, is it supposed to be blocked?
That's a good question, right? I'm not sure we will find the answer or the right answer today for it, but again, it's like everything in an organization. It's a risk-based approach. It depends what type of organization you are.
In your industry, let's say.
My industry, because you deal with a lot of customer information, you definitely have to have controls in place that it's not happening. With, of course, policies, procedures, technical controls, that even somebody tries it, that it's maybe getting masked or just blocked. Definitely need to have that in place. But on the other side, if you use it responsibly, in terms of productivity, in terms of just learning, understanding, I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, I guess there is no perfect middle ground between privacy and productivity and potential risks, So, I'm really curious, what kind of, are you, it looks like you're more of an open culture around, like, let's try more tools, but I'm always thinking, how do you find the perfect balance?
I definitely try to be super open about it, because in the end of the day, I think what a lot of security practitioners really need to focus on a lot is, in the end of the day, you support the business. So if the business wants to go a certain route, wants to take a certain risk, it's with the business. And you need to make sure that this decision is honored and you support as much as possible around to do this as secure as possible. But of course, working in the industry, seeing a lot of things, you definitely become at some point, not sure what word to use, but maybe very paranoid, right? You see a lot of things, you see how easy sometimes it is to compromise the system, right? You just run a script you found on GitHub or somewhere, and then the system's compromised. But on the other hand, you need to be open. You need to take a little bit of risk to get something new, to improve. No risk, no gain.
In your previous experience, you worked on multinational organizations. What are some things that you wish could have been improved from the cybersecurity perspective?
So I would maybe answer in that way that, like, a big corporation, they take very low risk. But because of this, everything is very lengthy. So maybe in terms of their cybersecurity, very often they're very good because they have also the budget in terms of getting the right tools, getting the right talent, and getting the right training to this talent. So maybe the only thing what can improve in bigger companies, using quicker, better, more modern tools, which gives you more visibility, just secure things in a completely different way. For example, AI, right? How many big corporations maybe use a super great new GenAI SOC chatbot, right? Where you can chat with your logs, understand what is happening, what vulnerabilities, to help your junior employees to better understand what is happening in the environment. How many big corporations use this? Maybe some, maybe none. I'm not sure. But younger organizations, especially if it's affordable, if it's easy to get, they would jump on it directly.
It looks like we're in the situations, multinational takes a long time to adopt something, but then when you're a startup, there is a budget restraint. So you have to be somewhere in between.
There's always something you need to work on.
Yeah.
Like no matter what you do, where you are, there's always some kind of problem, some kind of challenge. But I guess everything's exciting on both sides.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges that you seek to resolve in the future as you go forward? It's not necessarily a problem, but something that you envision could be done differently as you move forward in your career.
I guess in general, maybe making security more and more a solved problem. At least within my career, I see more and more there's so many tools, so many just off the shelf. If you use any of these big cloud providers, there's in terms of security already so much done, right?
Yeah.
Half of the portion, if you think about redundancy, physical security, so many things you don't need to think at all about it. Of course, somehow maybe you need to think about also tell your regulator and your compliance team, but the level they achieve, it's very difficult to replicate within your own organization. So maybe also like the other piece, which is remaining maybe more on the application side, more on the things you build yourself, making this more and more a solved problem. That once you build something, that the dream vision of like a cybersecurity expert is it's secure from the beginning to the end. And hopefully we reach at some point some kind of level where we can say this is at least high level also. Yeah, more or less a solved problem.
And I mean, with so many attacks coming out each and every day, I feel like this is very a dream scenario to say, hey, this tool protects me from everything, because there is always some like error. You know, you can't be like you have the most secure tool and then a new attack comes out. So I feel like a lot of it comes from the mentality. So a lot of security companies, you know, they have the niche, they have the problem that they solve. But then once new kind of threats come out, that is the question, like how fast are you to adopt, to expand the product to the extent that you can tell to your client, you can tell to Aspire, hey, I can help you. Like you don't even have to think, like it's already done for you. And yeah, I guess this would be ideal scenario.
Yeah, let's hope we will reach it at some point. But of course, you're right. It's a cat and mouse game, right? There's always a smart person on one side who tries to find new ways to break things. But there's always also a lot of smart people on the other side who think, how can I secure this in a way that at least it's a black box from my perspective, right? If you use these big cloud providers, of course, there's somebody sitting somewhere in a data center and secures these systems as well. But at least from a customer perspective, using these systems, they're sort of like a black box, a secured black box.
I mean, to also kind of stay on the top of your game, you have to have a great team in place, as you said, people that have this mentality of secure first kind of culture. And you know, right now the job market is so tough. How did you meet some of the best candidates in the security space, and what did they do to stand out in front of you?
Yeah, I interview a lot of people almost daily sometimes because we are growing. We search a lot of people. And
people must be listening right now.
Hopefully. But what I sometimes think is very shocking is even though you have some kind of selection process and you then start talking to people which are maybe already pre-selected, sometimes if you talk to people, they haven't even read the job description. Yeah. So quite shocking. But how I meet sort of the best people is sometimes just randomly by luck, right? You meet somebody at a conference, you talk to that person, and you just really get along really well, really crisp, really good conversation. But also just interviewing people. You come across a really, really great talent, but you need to really do the work for it. Is hiring, finding great talent is a lot of work. Yeah, I actually didn't envision before I started hiring myself how much work it is.
Makes sense. So what are some qualities? I know that you spoke about the venues, right? It sometimes just clicks. But what kind of qualities they possess?
Communication. Again, like I think communication is super important. You can have someone super, super smart, but if it's really hard to align, to understand each other, it just doesn't work. It can be a language barrier. It can be just type of communication style. It can be answers are not crisp and short.
As for German,
maybe it's a German trait for sure. But it's, just working a startup, everything needs to be fast, quick, a lot of iterations. You need to have good communication, crisp, short, and you also need to make sure that all of your stakeholders can understand.
Yeah.
You work with all sorts of people, different mindsets, different experiences, right? You have your super experienced tech professional on one side, you have the finance team, you have the compliance team, the regulator, customers, auditors.
Yeah.
With each of them, you need to almost speak a different language.
Yeah.
Sometimes I compare it to if you maybe grew up in a household, you maybe speak with your parents, maybe one language.
Yeah.
But in the outside world, maybe with your friends, you talk completely different type of language, or even like a different slang.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit same what you need to do in an organization.
Yeah. And especially in security, there are so many technicalities, and it's all about how do I go about communicating, as you said, to compliance team, to regulations team. You have to learn a new language each time you speak to someone. So communication is a big one. What are the other two?
I think just being positive. So really like basics, being positive, actually apply for something you have at least some experience in. Of course, we all want to grow. We all want to learn something new, and we want to jump into a new opportunity, which teaches us something new.
Yeah.
This is what we all want. But it also doesn't make sense. And very often it's time waste on both sides. If you apply for something you have zero experience in. So I also cannot potentially go into quantum physics at MIT or something. It's maybe too far away. It's not that I never can do it, but at least not at the moment.
Yeah.
So you need to have at least experience within your work, or you also can do it by yourself, right? Nowadays, internet, large language models, there's nothing you cannot learn. But you need to invest the time, the energy to learn it, and then show that you can do it.
What are some of the biggest risks that you took that paid off, whether it comes to hiring someone or your own personal journey, that you thought, okay, this was really risky, but it really paid off?
Maybe for myself, it always depends who thinks it's a risk. Some people would say that's risky. Some people would say like, oh, that's just, you're young. It's like, there's nothing, it's no risk.
Yeah.
But just randomly moving to places like the US, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, I think a lot of people would say that's a risk.
Yeah. Definitely.
Or what I also did, I moved jobs during the pandemic.
Yeah.
People looked at me like, hey, you're working at Siemens, like you shouldn't move.
Yes,
It's a pandemic. Everyone loses their jobs.
Yeah.
You're set here, you can work your entire life here. Why risking it now, moving to that company? You never know how long they will survive. But these kind of risks you have to sometimes take. And I think if you properly think through it, if you have the incident response in case something goes wrong, and you will be fine.
Yeah. No, it is a big risk, and especially, moving to startup world, I feel like you're really supposed to have a different kind of mindset to live in this kind of edge. Each time something happens, you're always a bit of an edge. But that's also something that makes it fun.
100%.
Yeah. Some more questions I have for you. So when it comes to aspiring professionals, what are your thoughts on certifications and how important are they?
That's a big one. So I believe certifications are a little bit similar to a university degree. So like anything where you get a piece of paper which certifies that you can do something, same as an audit, right? If you do an ISO 27001, a PCI, you get a certain thing certified. It doesn't mean if you have an ISO 27001 certificate that you're actually secure, right? It's only just really the edges of it. And it's the same with certifications. I think it certifies a certain aspect, but is very often a huge band. Somebody can have a certain certification and is the best in the world, and somebody can have a certain certification just started off, but they still at least know that aspect, but they can have different strength within that aspect. I think in the cybersecurity space, IT space, they're definitely very needed. Every job description, if you move to a new company, you definitely preferred if you have them. I would suggest people getting the usual ones, which are on the job description, just to have this entry ticket. I think very often it's an entry ticket.
So whoever is reaching out to you, they must have. Don't reach out to.
Not really. I think if you look at like the big players in the world, like Elon Musk, I don't think he has a CISSP or any of them.
That is true.
And he still made it. So if you can prove that you can do what you claim to be able to do, why not?
It reminds me the episodes from Suits. I don't know if you watched, but
I haven't watched it yet. No.
Yeah, there was a part where someone enters and is like, I don't have a degree from Harvard, but I'm able to memorize the whole law procedures and everything. So,
you can do it. There's definitely a path for you to still become super successful, to succeed, to get everything you really want. But it potentially more difficult in a traditional setup where you apply for a company and you want to get a certain job. But at the end of the day, especially the big companies, I think Google, Facebook, they were very public about it at some point. I'm not sure if they still do that, but they hire people without degrees to do software development and really, like senior software developers. And if you can prove during the interview process, you can do it. Why not? Yeah.
That is one culture to aspire to.
For sure. I mean,
aspire.
we aspire that, we work with great talents who are experienced and are just very good in what they do. And if they have a CISSP or not, I don't think it matters.
So, what are the top 3 TTPs that security professional need to possess?
Again, the initial one, I think I mentioned at the beginning, maybe especially potentially if you work in a SOC, you need to understand how to identify initial access, how to understand if something was executed on a user endpoint on a server, and you need to really prevent the exfiltration of data.
What would you advise? How do you generally stay on top of the cybersecurity trends?
In the past, it was through online trainings. I mean, there's a lot of very great platforms. Nowadays, there's just so much communication going on constantly with people like you, people at conferences, my CISO groups, and also just a lot of tools we're using. We're running our own SOC. Of course, they need to read threat reports, what is happening. We have tools which are telling us like, hey, this is currently exploited in the public space, and you potentially have a similar vulnerability, so better fix it quickly. So this is how I nowadays stay on the top of the game, and everything else is just added up with a little bit of YouTube here and there.
YouTube is necessary.
For sure.
So when you said CISO groups, is it mostly in Singapore or is it like online CISO groups?
Mostly in Singapore. So people I personally know at some point you sort of team up, right? Singapore is a fairly small place, as most people know.
Yeah.
So I see some groups here become a little bit like almost like a family.
Oh.
You meet them all the time. You have chat groups with them. You share information, maybe lessons learned, how to do certain things with a regulator. What is the best thing? What do you really need to focus on? So yeah, it's a lot of threat intel sharing.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm feeling very privileged, to have opportunity to speak to so many cybersecurity professionals that have just so much expertise to share about what they do. And I guess one of the last questions that I wanted to ask, we have this thing that we do on Be Fearless podcast. So the previous guest asks questions to the next guest. So our previous guest asked, what's the one thing you shouldn't be doing?
You shouldn't be doing. I think not using a password manager. I think we touched on it, and I really believe it's like one of the key components. Because again, initial access, right? Very often it comes through compromised passwords because people use the same password everywhere. They use the same email address everywhere. So if you have a password manager which generates you unique passwords, which stores it securely for you, and then also retrieves it securely, I think it's one of the key aspects you should do. So you should not use one.
I have to admit, I'm quite guilty. I wasn't using it before. Now I'm using it. So
perfect. Hopefully I've changed all your passwords.
Of course.
Perfect.
So I'm not targeted. So what's one question you'd like to ask to our next guest?
I mean, the year is almost ending, right?
Yeah.
So maybe a question would be, what is the number one thing you should be focusing on in 2025?
It's like a New Year's resolution, right?
Maybe not New Year's resolution, but
just,
I mean, I don't want to maybe give an answer to it, but there could be so many aspects to it in terms of maybe cyber, in terms of maybe trends you should skill yourself up with. So,
yeah. Okay. We'll make sure that the next person answered it.
I will listen in for it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Tobias. It was such a pleasure to have you on our Be Fearless podcast, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having a chat today, and looking forward to the next.
Yes. Awesome.